All right, we're live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Truth Talks, a production of the Truth Movement New Brunswick. I'd like to thank our regular panelists, Sally, Natasha, and Courtney, for joining us this evening. We do have a special guest, the Honourable Dominic Cardy, the Minister of Education. We wanted to welcome you to the show, and thanks very much for showing up and giving us your time. I know you're a very busy man. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So, excuse me. Sorry about that. 3 out of 5 of us out of our main coalition, the admins, were very disappointed when the bill failed, the vaccine bill. So obviously you were probably very disappointed. So what's next for you is in that, like it's...
Well, it was defeated in the legislature, so by a pretty narrow margin, but still it was pretty unfortunate that you had people who were influenced by just scaremongering conspiracies. That wasn't based on anything real. And there were people who said they'd vote for the bill when it was introduced last year. And I think some of the folks who opposed it intentionally delayed to allow anti-vaxxers who are effective when they get mobilized. So we were bombarded with thousands of messages.
Oh, I know.
Across Canada. And so now the next step is going to be, I would guess, the next conversation around vaccines in New Brunswick will be what do we do when we get a COVID-19 vaccine? Because I can, certainly from my perspective, you get a safe, reliable vaccine. I can't imagine there's a lot of people who are going to want to continue living with the social distancing and masks and all the other
tough
upheavals that have been thrown into our lives because of this virus. So it's depressing that we're having arguments about things that should be as basic as, should you breathe oxygen or should you drink water to stay alive? Vaccines are safe and effective. Unfortunately, there's a growing movement of of folks out there who are pushing against that. And I think those of us who believe in science and evidence have got to just redouble our efforts and push back harder, because those voices are getting louder and louder. You hear them in the States all the time. Now they've meshed in with the anti-masking movements and with people who believe 5G cell towers are somehow causing them cancer. And it's a depressing descent back into medieval silliness. But
yes, no, absolutely. And
if citizens
we've heard, sorry about that, Minister Cardy. We have also on this page had, and I think you were a part of it there one time, quite a bit of blowback from the anti-vaccination movement parents. But anyways, we didn't want to make this whole thing about vaccines, but I might bring Courtney into the conversation next, just because she was one of the ones that supported your bill and wrote her letter of expertise to back your bill. So I'll just let her, introduce herself there and ask you whatever question she wanted to talk about.
Sounds good.
Hi, Master Cardy. So I'm Courtney. I'm doing actually a PhD in pharmacology at McGill. So I very much agree with the nonsense that's going on and the need to push for more, public belief in science and evidence, evidence-based medicine. But my question's actually unrelated to that. You're the Minister of Education in New Brunswick, obviously. And I wanted to just ask you about your views about sort of the Black Lives Matters movement in New Brunswick and schools, and the push that I've seen from a lot of groups in New Brunswick for better education on Black and Indigenous history in Canada. So I just wanted to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, first, I think it's been the beginning of an important conversation in the last while, acknowledging that systemic racism exists, which the fact that's gone from something that was, I think, seen as being a more fringe belief until really recently, and suddenly in the last few months, you have everyone, again, including nearly all the members of the PC government, which I think has got to be good news, recognizing that systemic racism is real, and the only way to dismantle something that is systemic is to create systems to undermine it and replace it with something better. And I've been really pleased in my meetings with the Black Lives Matter team in St. John a couple of weeks back now, that they were really focusing, and I believe the Fredericton group is as well. I'm meeting them in the next couple of weeks, but I don't want to speak for them. But the St. John group saying that this has got to be something that we confront through education. That you take a little human and they're born anywhere in the world, they grow up with the good and the bad of the culture that they're born and raised into. And here in New Brunswick, clearly one of the areas we have to address through education is systemic racism. And so when we were talking, I asked them to get back to me and put this pitch out to the folks watching today as well. send me ideas about what goals do we want to see our education system reach? Because part of it's, I think, is kind of obvious, the history part. I was really disappointed, and I found this out some months ago. The only reference to the Black experience in New Brunswick in the education system is a single little reference in grade 7 social studies, and it refers to pre-Confederation times. There's this huge richness there that's just being ignored.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason for that. Similarly, in Indigenous studies, where we've gotten much better and there are now specific courses, and I was happy to support Green MLA Megan Mitten's bill, as was everyone in the ledge. All 4 parties signed off on this to include language around Indigenous language and culture. A couple of, I guess, a month or so back, and with Megan's support, I introduced an amendment that's further strengthened her original motion to make sure those changes were reflected throughout the Education Act. And at this point, this is a starting point. We've got a tiny number, dozens of people in the province who speak First Nations languages fluently enough. We don't have a teaching cohort yet. But one of the ways I'm trying to take advantage of the horrors thrown at us by COVID-19 is we're going to have the opportunity, especially at high school level, for more and more online learning. Mm-hmm. And there are online courses on First Nations languages already available. So students will be able to take those starting next month, if that's what they're interested in. And that seems to me like a good start. But with Black Lives Matter and on the Indigenous education file, one of the things that we have to do first is to listen and to make sure that we're actually listening to the people who've been most affected by being excluded from their own history as well, because Black New Brunswickers are New Brunswickers the same way the rest of us are. Mm-hmm. And this idea as well, this is somehow an add-on or something that is being imposed, which I've heard from a couple of folks. That's really, I'm a first-generation immigrant to Canada and to New Brunswick. My story gets to be told. Why can't the story of people whose families have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years? So that's my hope, is that we're at the beginning of a pretty good conversation. And I was, again, really pleased that the group that I met with were focusing so strongly in education, because to me, that's where this is going to begin, and where systemic racism will be eliminated, is through education and people realizing that skin color is a pretty stupid way to divide us.
Mm. Thank you very much, Courtney and Minister Cardy. I'm going to hand it over to Natasha right now. So Natasha can bring up her unique perspective as an immigrant herself, and I'll let Natasha introduce herself and hit you with what she has.
Hello, Minister Cardy. So my perspective is a bit different. I'm an immigrant to Canada myself, and I'm Muslim. So our when this whole Black Lives Matter was coming up, we were very glad that it was, because we may not have the same background, but we share similar experiences of marginalization, and as our children do, who go through the school system. And my question was, you're talking about changes to the curriculum, which are much needed, but it was more sort of like, do you have any plans for anti-racism training for district employees, or even employees of the Department of Education? Because what we often see is it's not overt acts of racism that are the problem. It's not people shouting racial slurs or kicking people and saying, go home. It's usually very subtle, and it's under the table. It's not really expressed. And sometimes the people who are expressing it are not even aware that they are treating people differently. And that's often what you would see in workplaces or settings like that. It's more of a sort of an implicit bias that comes out, and that causes different experiences in different communities. So do you have any plans for anti-racism training for just overall, for district employees, for department employees, so they become more aware of this implicit bias and become more cognizant of it when they are planning policies or trying to make change? Because it's not, people tend to get defensive and say, well, I'm not racist. It's not people who are actually consciously racist. It's people who may not ever have even thought about discriminating between different sets of people. But because they've never had that lived experience, they wouldn't really know that this policy might affect people in different ways. So do you have any plans for that?
Sure. The government already has diversity and anti-racism workshops available. I'm fairly confident. I know that when I was first elected, there were some mandatory courses for all the MLAs to take, for example, around inclusive workplaces. But we can do more of that. And certainly from my perspective in the department, the approach that I've taken is really trying to, whenever we're looking at policy development, is to have what used to be called gender-based analysis, and has over the last number of years evolved to be inclusive, a broader inclusive lens around policy development and budget processes. So you try whenever you're developing anything to make sure that you run it through the filters as exactly you're talking about. How is this going to impact different groups? And so that's been my effort, and since I got into the department, and that's interestingly becoming something that is catching on in other departments too, which I've been pretty pleased at colleagues who recognize this is just a way to make the policies work better. And if you have a policy that has unintended consequences that are going to accidentally, as you put it, not through any ill will or malice, but accidentally not reach the goals that you think they're going to, why on earth wouldn't you step back, take the steps to make sure the policy works properly? And if that means broader engagement, or consultations, or just reallocating resources here and there inside an existing policy, or recognizing that maybe it doesn't work at all. No shame in admitting that something doesn't work and trying something different. So it's something that I think I appreciate the way you framed it as well, because I spent a lot of my professional life before moving home working in Muslim countries, and I went to places where they had not necessarily ever met a Christian person or a white person before, and you go to places in rural New Brunswick where there hasn't been a lot of immigration since the original wave of settlers came in a couple of hundred years back. It's not through malice that people can end up by having experiences that end up feeling negative. And it's having positive and friendly ways that we can share tools to make those cross-cultural conversations happen more easily, and experiences with people of different groups, whether it's sexual identities, racial or religious backgrounds. That to me is that's the way we've got to move ahead. I mean, it's one of the things I found very depressing the last couple of years as we moved into this increased polarization between populist left and populist right, where you're either completely woke or you're a fascist. Most of us don't live there. Most of us actually live in a place, Canada, for all of its warts, all of its flaws, we have some tools that allow us to continue to move ahead. We're not by no means perfect yet, or even close to it, but we have tools that allow us to evolve. Let's keep using those rather than throwing them out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Sally, did you want to ask Minister Cardy a question?
Yes, I do actually. Minister Cardy, this is, my question is quite similar to Natasha's, and it's going to be a little bit less sweet than Natasha's, because Natasha, I'm not sure how old she was when she immigrated here. I am born in Moncton, New Brunswick. I am first generation born in Moncton, New Brunswick. I am visibly multi-ethnic. I have an afro. And now I'm a mother of a 4-year-old boy and a 1.5-year-old boy. And I'm quite, to this day, suffering from extreme severe PTSD from some of the things that have happened to me in my school years. And Natasha is kind to say that some of it was unintended racism, but I also work with the public every day. And I can tell you very frankly and very directly that there is a lot of very direct racism as well. Now, as a child, I have endured everything from extreme psychological abuse to actually being assaulted and having my parents receive the phone call of, your daughter has been admitted to hospital by ambulance. And this is in middle school, not in high school, because she was assaulted and attacked by multiple other students. And here I am, and I have a 4-year-old. And next year, my 4-year-old is going to go to school. And I would be lying to you if I did not say that I am looking into self-defense courses and martial arts courses, because I refuse to be the mother who receives the phone call saying my child was admitted to the hospital because he was assaulted. And I'd rather instead be the mother getting the phone call saying, your son sent another child to the hospital, and be able to say that, ask my son, did he attack you first? And him say yes. So my question to you is, and it still exists today, and it's not, maybe there's a lot less tolerance for physical, and I've had petitions by parents to have me expelled from the school in grade 2. So this is not children, these are actually parents that petitioned to have me expelled from the school because I was different. And this is from a big city in New Brunswick, which is Moncton. And so my question to you is, there's a lot of gaslighting where we are told our children need to be stronger, our children need to be tougher. When they're bullied, they just kind of need to learn to brush it off.
Mhm.
I'd like to know what changes can we bring to policy and how can we affect change to policy so that people like myself, who are literally, in the most literal of senses, traumatized from being in the New Brunswick public at a vulnerable age, and now I have a child that I have to trust with the system, with my own child, and I'd be lying if I said I'm okay with receiving the phone call saying your child has been admitted to the hospital with permanent life-altering injuries, which is the phone call my parents received. So, and nothing was done then. And I'd hope that things would be different now, although from speaking to many of my multicultural friends, there is still a lot of gaslighting. In my case, it was, oh, well, they were playing. I'm not sure what part of it they were playing. Was it the surrounding me in a circle and shoving me to the ground, or the kicking the life out of me once I was on the ground? Sounds like a great game. But I mean, in honesty, as a parent, I'm actually shaking as I speak to you about this, not because I'm reliving my experience, but because now I'm trusting the system with my most important part of my life. And I have to trust the system is going to keep him safer now than it has kept me then. And the policies are not there yet. So what can we do? How can I contribute to change? How can I help make your job easier to make the change? Because like you said, there is lots of movement forward, and I'm so happy to see the movement forward. But as a parent who is, in the most literal sense, afraid for my child's life and safety, what can we do differently to make the message clear that we need a safer place for our children, be they different ethnicity, different religion, different sexual orientation, different
Everyone.
gender identity? We need safety.
Yes, I mean, we talk about an inclusive education system, and we have made strides there, but it's still, it's, I had, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I am 35, almost 36.
I'm just 50, and had similar experience in school in terms of that was the environment. And it's, I found in the schools that I've visited since I became minister, and previous years when I was in politics over the last 10 years, that it has gotten a lot better. That the stuff that I remember being common, which is exactly the sort of stories you're talking about, it's better. It's still not good enough. And I think the point you started with as well around children being able to give them the tools to defend themselves. One of the things I found really concerning, I think that we may actually have swung over so far that the children are expecting now adults to mediate and handle every single situation without a level of responsibility being placed on the children. And so I think the quality of the education they're getting in terms of on this particular subject, I mean, we've got lots of gaps elsewhere, but on this around being tolerant, being inclusive, there are enormous strides. I mean, I still find it amazing. You go into any school in New Brunswick and there's a pride flag up, and there's an acceptance there of people from other countries that absolutely was not there when I went through the system. People from my age group certainly didn't experience that.
Same.
Yeah, and of course that's partly a reflection of the fact the province has changed in the last decades. Now you have more people who were born from outside of the Anglo-Saxon countries and a couple of places maybe in Western Europe. And so there has been some evolution there. But I think your point around trying to figure out how we build resiliency now, because the thing that I'm scared of most now is that we've gone from having a culture of bullying to a culture of, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but where there's again a level of dependency that we see now perpetuating itself as the kids leave school. And that's, you're talking about some specifics around how issues around race and culture and language impact that, but we're seeing it even more broadly with just an inability of kids once they graduate being able to deal with their own finances, taking their first jobs and requiring a huge amount of direction from people they're working with. And it's a problem that I think we're going to have to figure out the next couple of years, because when I talk to teachers, they're all very concerned. What's this next generation going to be like when they get out into the real world? And have to confront it. And my concern there is that if they don't have the tools to cope with conflict, they'll end up by falling back into the patterns of behavior you and I experienced, which were ones where we didn't have adults mediating it, and you have Lord of the Flies, little kids being awful to each other in the ways that kids are uniquely well placed to do. So in terms of what can be done, one of the things that I strongly encourage anyone who's got a stake in the system, as you do right now with your child getting ready to go into it, get involved with your school and get involved with the district education councils. That routinely we have elections for district education councils who have a lot of power over school projects, they have input into curriculum processes, really every single element of the education system. And they directly influence the work of the districts. And the districts have, in many operational cases, more power than I do as minister to change the way that schools operate and deal with some of the problems you're talking about. So next year, when we had to delay the elections, they should have been this May. Now they'll be next May. Going back to my Muslim country, inshallah, we'll have elections next May if things can go back to normal after COVID. But if we can get people actually engaged in the system, because what we tend to get with DEX is the people who run, you get a smattering of parents, but you get a lot of people who are retired educators, and they're fantastic people and doing great work, but they're doing it because they don't see anyone else stepping up in some cases. So if the more parents and more people who've got a direct stake in the system, and I know I'm asking people watching you and you yourself, who've got 3,001 things on your plate and trying to be a mother as well as handling the rest of your life. But in the end, I think one of the things we've gotten away for, which ties back to your first point, is if we want things to change, we have to sacrifice. And I think one of the flaws in our culture in Canada and other Western countries in recent years has been the idea that things will just arrive, and they won't. We have to fight for them. We have to work for them. And you've got passion for this subject. Get involved. Make sure that we don't have a system that reflects the worst of what you went through. Find ways to tease out the best of what you went through and bring that forward. And I think again, the system is much better than it was when we went through it, but there's still a huge amount that can change. So it'd be great to have your help, as long as I'm in this job, which could be who knows, weeks, months, who knows. Regardless, I'll always be an ally.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Yes, thank you too, Sally. Just wondering about the consequences of COVID and the toll that it has taken on, just people that have never even previously had mental health issues before. What kind of consideration is there moving forward? Because the all these isolations in life getting disrupted, it's very difficult for us as adults to adjust to, but kids have a much harder time with it. So, and I'm just kind of wondering how do you deal with, or do you anticipate some kind of maybe more challenges with mental health of some students?
Absolutely. I mean, it links back into a little bit what Sally was saying and what we were talking about in response to her question around lack of resilience. It's interesting. I mean, initially there was a lot of concern when we were talking about mask policies and things, and clearly now for basic physical reasons, it turns out that you really don't want to get little kids wearing masks, because if they put the mask on, then they spend their time putting their fingers up their nose and in their eyes and everything else. So the masks just don't do a lot because they're busy undermining it because they're playing with the masks. And that's there's a bit of a cultural context. You look at places like South Korea, they have no problem getting 4-year-olds to wear masks, but South Korea has a lot more of a regimented and communitarian style culture where they're much more used to following orders from an early age, much more than kids are here. Argue the good and bad of that, but whatever. So it's been interesting. So that with the little kids, it seems that they're actually ending up being fairly resilient because they're little kids and they absorb anything that's in front of them and they model the behavior they see adults exhibiting. So for them, there seems to be a bit less anxiety than there was earlier in the pandemic. But for the older kids and for the teaching staff, there's a huge psychological impact, because for all of us who are now into, again, just past 50 now, well into middle age, this is our world that's just blown up, right? All the things that we thought about and all the things that we were trying to advance and push ahead have now been really undermined by the events of the last few months in ways that most of us never really thought about or certainly planned for. And you combine that with the social disruption we're seeing, whether it's the chaos down south in the States or the rise of populist movements in Europe and elsewhere. Canada, again, so far, we're pretty blessed in being largely immune from that, but we probably won't be forever. And So the mental health issues, I think, are going to be serious, and I think they're going to be nearly universal, with probably, again, the children right now, little kids right now, being the ones who are best able to handle it, because for them, sadly, that's the world they're going to grow up in. But for the rest of the students and for the staff, we're absolutely looking at strengthening mental health supports. So we had a challenge the last couple of years that unfortunately the College of Psychologists changed their rules to require that you have a PhD to be a school psychologist. And we already had trouble attracting master's level school psychologists, in part because we don't pay them enough, and we're working on that. But there's also a supply problem, and now that supply problem is being compounded by this increased demand for higher levels of qualification. So what we're trying to do is find out ways we can give our guidance counselors a sort of skills upgrade, and also ways that we can give our frontline school teachers as well, the classroom teachers, some training in how to at least triage mental health problems. Because they're being asked to, the teachers today are being asked to, again, so comparing Sally, at the time when you were in school, when I was in school a decade before that, the challenges the teachers have to endure today are so vastly more complicated than they were when we went to school, partly because we've gone through a shift in the way that we treat schools and teachers. That, you know, when I was in school, your teacher would say something, you'd sit there, and no matter how afraid you might be and how awful it was, you would still obey, and the classroom would be a disciplined environment, and the awfulness would happen outside. Now the teachers are broadly expected to be individualized social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, teachers, tutors, and quasi-parents in many cases. And they have not been given any extra training to do this, no extra authority. And in fact, the authority of teachers is being vastly reduced because you also didn't have back in, I'm starting to feel old. It must be this, you must get this card when you turn 50 that you suddenly get starts. My parents would never have dreamed of going to my teacher and complaining about a mark. Now it's completely standard for the teachers to get regular calls complaining about the ways that the teachers have acted in a number of different files. And some of that could be justified, but it seems like, again, we swung violently over in another direction, which is making things even less manageable. So we are working to try and give teachers some extra skills, get the guidance counselors more training, talking with people in the Department of Health as well about the broader mental health impacts and social development too. And this is going to be an active file for the next couple of years, because usually the way that when you have a major mental health crisis as well, some people will show the symptoms and the reactions to that nearly right away, and others it will be months or years down the road.
That's right.
This pandemic could easily be with us for another, I would guess, a year or so at least before we have a safe and effective vaccine. I see the Russians are rushing one out in a week, which I would be somewhat hesitant about. But anyway,
Russians are
regardless, as quickly as we can get it out, great. But then I think that's going to be one of the major side effects of this is going to be a mental health crisis that we're going to have to work to address, because politically, a concern there, and obviously speaking of someone in politics, my concern as well is that when people feel traumatized and when they feel afraid and they feel their civilization and their system isn't defending them, they start to look for strong authority figures to provide guidance and meaning in a time of uncertainty and fear. And if we move in that direction, that would seem like a pretty unfortunate path we could take. I think we did that back in the 1930s, didn't work out so well. I wouldn't like to see us repeat that.
We really, like, all of New Brunswick needs help. I know you're the Minister of Education, but there are so few resources for mental health, and long waiting list, and certain insurance companies are like, so there has different criteria has to be covered for plans and stuff. And
or you get people, you get a plan to go in, and you get someone with this mental health crisis and they have enough insurance to go in and have 3 meetings with someone, just enough
that's
to find out
if
they're
that
really, and then off you go.
Somebody in a mental health crisis needs help right away, and which goes way beyond 10-12 o'clock at night. And there's just no, it's concerning about Chantel Moore being shot during an wellness check. More will come out on that eventually, but yeah, just really, I know you guys passed some kind of legislation, everybody, each party, I think, to look into mental health a little more, or something there last year, I believe, didn't you?
Yeah, but we've got to look at it. I mean, it's one of those, this is one of those things I'm hoping is just like the last time we went through sort of a civilizational crisis in the West in the 1930s and 40s, is that we can take advantage of this one to reset the way that we operate, just like we did after the war, when we all recognized, you know what, we need to have universal pensions and unemployment insurance, and we need to have universal health care, and we need to strengthen public education, all those things that came out of that period of time that I'm hoping out of this one, given that now we all say we recognize and believe that mental health and physical health are the same thing, and that you can't go around saying that a broken arm is important and that serious chronic depression isn't, when one is easily curable with a few weeks of rest and the other one can require years of help. And if you don't get help for the mental health problem, it's likely to have huge effects, not just on the person and their family, but on the economy in the province. And,
That's right.
Yeah, and we've seen over the last couple of generations that there's a level of mental health apartheid as people who are able to access the supports that they need, get help, and are able to continue to do well in life and move ahead. And if you come from a disadvantaged background, don't have insurance or whatever else, you end up being crushed.
You're out of luck.
Yeah, the basic challenges of just getting out of bed in the morning and going to work because you didn't have your community supporting you, even though you're paying the same level of tax as everyone else, you didn't get that support, and you just get pushed further down. And then what do? You end up by hanging out with other people who've been pushed further down. And then you create an underclass of people who are excluded from all the opportunities that our society is supposed to offer everyone equally.
Yep.
And that is entirely unreasonable. We don't accept it anymore for people with physical disabilities. We've got to work on mental health. I think it's going to be one of the next big challenges.
Absolutely.
But it's expensive. And so that's always.
I know. But mentally healthy, mentally well people, mentally healthy, mentally healthy people are going to perform better. They're going to go to work more. They're going to miss less time. They're going to be just more productive overall. It just kind of makes sense to.
It's one of those problems, though, with politics is that, and this is something which I always any chance to talk to voters, not directly to you guys, but to the folks watching as well, that don't vote for parties that promise they're going to fix everything overnight. And when someone talks about something that's not going to show any results for 5 or 6 or 10 years, look seriously at that, because those are often serious problems. If we're serious on education, about really ramping up the way that our education system works, we need universal early childhood education. And we need to have a province-wide consensus on that, because it's expensive. It'll cost about $500 million to do it properly. But the benefits of that over the course of a generation are enormous. If we're serious about dealing with poverty, we've got to deal with the fact we've got a 56% functional illiteracy problem in this province. That's going to be, you want to stop people from ripping off the system, stop people from the things that people on the hard right will complain about, poor people mooching and whatever else. You want to stop people from doing that, give them the tools to succeed. And learning how to read is a pretty basic tool, and there's no reason we can't do that. But it's trying to get people to look at problems that aren't immediately apparent and that will take more than a couple of years to solve, and will go beyond one electoral cycle. That's one of the things that, plug for the government I'm part of, is that it's the team of people I've worked with in 30 plus years of politics least interested in winning elections, which is kind of weird, kind of nice. And I hope we can keep up.
Did any of you have a follow-up question for Dominic before we probably have time left for one more?
I'm talking too much.
Natasha, are you trying to say something in your mute?
Yes, I was muted. So it's just a follow-up to what you and Sally were talking about, and she referred to gaslighting. And gaslighting is a tool that's often used, sometimes deliberately, and sometimes it's just unconscious. But what it does is it creates mental health problems in people who don't have them. And getting back to the school system and the whole training aspect, racism isn't evolved. I think Sally was referring to her experiences, you were referring to the environment you had seen. It's evolved because now it's unacceptable. Nobody comes out publicly and says racism is great. I'm okay with racism. Very few people are crazy enough to say that.
Except
so
sadly, some people to the south of us, but we won't talk about that.
The alt-right, but it's most people will never say I'm okay with racism. So it's gone sort of underground. Also, violence in schools has gone down dramatically from what it was before. They're very serious about it. They take it in a very sort of proactive light. There's a very strong policy. Yes, it does happen, but kids have to find a time in the 5 minutes that the teacher is out of sight. So it's very rare at this point. But what's happened as a result, because racism is an unacceptable thing, violence is unacceptable, it's sort of gone underground. And when things go underground, there's a huge sort of pressure on everybody who witnesses it, and that includes the administration, to deny and say, listen, maybe you're wrong, maybe it wasn't intended that way, maybe it didn't really happen. And this results in a sort of like community gaslighting of the person who's been subjected to it. And that can lead to mental health disorders down the road. So this often, this often happens because some people who are witnessing it just have never experienced it themselves, have never seen it. It's not part of their lived reality. So I was thinking of, you're always looking for what could be a good solution for that. And one thing is representation. Representation, diversity and representation does matter. And I understand the population is largely homogenous. However, because the change in the student population is happening, there should be a sort of a commensurate change in people who are, part of the school system, whether it's educational assistants, or whether it's Department of Education employees. And I think this was part of my question, because they form the policies, people at the Department of Education. So what is your percentage? Would you have an idea what the percentage would be of minorities who are employees at the Department of Education?
No idea.
No idea.
No idea. Okay.
Was that
So-
no idea or no diversity?
Oh, no idea. There's definitely diversity. There's definitely
Okay.
people with diverse backgrounds here
Okay.
in the headquarters and in the districts and in the school system, but I do not know the percentage.
Would
Not
there
something we
be, just to follow, like, since we don't know what it is right now, would there be sort of any interest in trying to do like active sort of recruitment to sort of make it more of an inclusive environment? Because it's really, change comes at the top, and the top is the Department of Education. So if you have people who are just physically there, it gets people to sort of think, wait a minute, there's somebody around the table who looks different, who lives life differently. Even if you're not actively going out of your way to make things challenging for other populations, you just become more aware simply by having people around you who have different experiences. So is there any sort of interest in that?
There's been a long-standing policy of sort of encouraging applicants from diverse backgrounds at the government level. And but one of the things there that we have to, which it's depressing again, the way COVID has thrown this off, that the last couple of years we were finally starting to see a real shift in our immigration numbers.
Okay.
Seeing people from all over the world deciding to make the Brunswick home. We're also apparently, and I mean, see how long this lasts, because of the fact that we've managed to get through the virus so well to date. One of the reasons that housing prices are going up here higher than a lot of other places right now, it's because we're still seeing people interested in coming here because presumably they see it as a safe and stable corner of the world, which, relatively speaking, it is. But so that's that we're going to absolutely continue along those directions. But one of the things I push back on a bit from what you were saying at the beginning is that I don't think you can have unintentional gaslighting. And I think one of the things we've got to be really careful of is that, again, someone who lives in a small village in rural New Brunswick, if they say something that's insensitive, I'm always reminded of a boss that I had when I worked for an American organization in Nepal. She was African American. We went off to this little village. The kids pulled on her hair. She had dreadlocks, and she found this really upsetting. And I remember going out for dinner with her back in Kathmandu some weeks later, and a couple of other friends who were also African American. And one of them saying, "Look, I've never seen a Black person before. They're not being racist. They're just curious, same way anyone else would be curious because they've never seen anything like it." So having someone from a different religious background, different skin color, for a lot of people, that just might be something that's literally new for them. And so I'd be really cautious about saying that those folks are gaslighting if they say something negative or even something that sounds prejudicial. But gaslighting, because again, the word comes from that original movie where the guy tries to convince the woman of something that is literally.
I got you, Sally.
Right. So
very, very quickly, Sally, we need to wrap up.
Yes, no, just on the same gaslighting topic, people can be, I respectfully disagree with you, Minister Cardy. People can unintentionally gaslight. As international people, we've been told that, some of the things that occur in our heads. And actually, my daughter is of color. She's recently graduated and moved away. And a lot of people I've met of the immigrant population, once they arrive in Moncton, they tend to want to leave after they secure their residency for no other reason that they don't feel welcome. And so they search for provinces or cities or whatever where they find better identity. And same thing when these same students, these children are going through our education system, they graduate and then they go on to university in different provinces and then go and have those careers in the different provinces because they feel safer, because they feel seen by the system. I respectfully disagree, but to this day,
That's
I've
okay.
heard where the children are told, the children and the parents are told, well, it's going to toughen them up. You know, it's just kids being kids. But when
Right, but
it's
that's
kind
not-
of like
that's
me
systemic.
going to someone who is transgender and being like, saying something absolutely unacceptable about their identity.
But
Well,
that's the
I would be
systemic problem.
choked, right? But because I'll say something subtle about pubic hair head sitting right in front of you right here, which is a common thing that, you know, I get told. Well, no, that's not that. No, they're just being silly. And that's where the difference is, right?
Sure, but
I think he
gaslighting
wants to
can be-
reply. Yeah.
is that I think that the difference is between, we're talking, if you have individuals who don't have experience or background in something and are just absorbing a cultural narrative that they're born with, I think there we have to talk about systemic racism, and we have to be kind to individuals and
Yeah.
cruel to destructive systems.
Yes.
And the problem is that most of us, it's easier, especially if you end up, as you have been, confronted by people actively being racist, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It doesn't matter very much if you experience it. That the way to push back on that with that individual is most likely going to be to go around I think the question around Black Lives Matter is going to be through the education system to try and stop people from continuing those attitudes into the future. And
Education.
I see this over and over again, that those changes, as much as things are difficult, part of the reason they're difficult is because we're talking about them. And that I was in a room with a bunch of senior Tories the other week, nearly all of them over 60. And someone cracked a mild joke that wasn't, I don't even think actually intended to be homophobic. It was a reference to Richard Hatfield back in the day. And no one laughed. There was an uncomfortable silence, and someone said, let's move on from that. And that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. Yeah. There's a pretty rapid evolution. And so let's keep that up. And my only concern is that if we make people who unintentionally screw up feel that they are part of an intentional system of repression, rather than being the people who are the most well placed to dismantle that system, because they're the ones who are on the edge. That's what my only concern is. It's my concern is, as a political project, we've got to make sure we keep our arms open as much as possible and as long as possible. And I know that a couple of the folks on the call, I've chatted with you around my dealings with on the anti-vaxxers, and I'm certainly not very nice to them on occasion. So I need to make this better myself. But it's hard. You deal with people who are saying things are stupid or evil or awful. Your inclination is to slap them because they're saying things that are stupid or awful.
Yeah.
But again, if we're going to be serious about trying to change things, yes, call out things when they're evil, and when someone actually is gaslighting and they're intentionally doing it in the way that the anti-vaxxers and some of the alt-right people will, I'm not racist. I just want to live my own kind, the other rubbish things they say. Let's hit those people hard. But when someone in a small town doesn't know what the right words to use, let's be open-hearted and talk to them.
Exactly. There just needs to be some open conversation, and some people just don't understand. And we really got to wrap this up here now. We keep our show 45 minutes long, and I told you we wouldn't keep you any more than 45 minutes. I know you're really busy. So thank you so much, Minister Cardy, for joining the show. I think have a lot to, talk about from what we discussed here. And
We'd love to have you back.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back sometime. I feel like I pestered you a little bit to get you here, but thank you so much for joining us.
No,
and
great to be on, and glad we were able to work it out. And yeah, happy to come back again. I appreciate the chance to chat.
Right on. This is how
We'd love to have you.
It's good for us to all move forward, because these discussions all need to be had with many, many people. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you especially to Minister Cardy, our panelist, and Truth Talks Out. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care, Dominic. Bye.